live. It is just gone 5:30 on a bit of a fresh Wednesday afternoon here with Peter Ramsey from the UK, dialing in 8:30 in the morning there, or 7:30?
8:30.
8:30. So didn't get you up too early. So
no, it's fine.
Mate, thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to doing this one all week. All my team, pretty much most of my clients who I've told that we're doing this as well are all really excited. So I think there'll be a bit of pressure on me to edit this one and get this one turned over.
Okay.
But for the uninitiated who've never heard of you, losers, why don't you just take a quick minute to who you are and what you do?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Peter. I run the UX. Well, I guess it's a blog. It's also a consultancy on the side. A kind of UX, a place that that I post content around mistakes that companies make and the things they could do better. So doing tear downs of like products that most people would use and say that's as close to perfect as you can get. And then I try and show the mistakes they make, which are because they're big companies, right? So I post content online, and luckily some people read it. Before that, I was a founder. I started and then sold my own fintech company. So that was how I kind of honed my craft, as it were. But now I'm doing this.
Beautiful. And so I think one of the things that I really like about Built for Mars is it sort of highlights some of those things that we all take for granted as part of a flow, if you like. But then when someone points it out, it makes you go, actually, yeah, I don't know why they do that. Like, yes, I've encountered that. It really irks me when that happens. And I think because there's so much more competition for our attention and for our money online now, getting some of these little things right through our process can be the difference between a prospective customer dropping out or a prospective customer completing a purchase or a sign up or something that you're trying to get them to do. So I still think, I don't know about you, I still think that a lot of people in the tech space, probably more sort of senior business level, still think of design as colors and graphics and that sort of stuff, rather than designing the process. So
well, that's the whole, that's the whole theory behind what I do, right? So the name Built for Mars, the idea of it was, people should build products that work anywhere. And when you take the context out of what you're doing and you give it to someone else in a new environment or whatever, new device, does it still work? And, you highlighted the problem there, which is business owners look at UX as being a role very similar to design and UI design. The reality is what's happened over the last 20 years is what used to be called the customer experience has now merged into the user experience, because we don't think of when you had a shop, you would have one customer walk in, and if that customer walked in again tomorrow, that would just be another customer. You wouldn't know that person. Whereas now you have users come back, you know who they are, you know every time they visit your online store. So customer experience has morphed into user experience, and a lot of these companies haven't caught up with the idea that the money you would spend on a physical shop front and the experience, the uniform your staff wears, that is now digital user experience, and that's all part of this process. So it's definitely not just design, it's everything. Emails.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about Shola from a retail perspective. We've been businesses are very reactionary to somebody comes in a store, we go and serve them, rather than someone comes into a store and we give them a great experience and we make everything really smooth and seamless, because we want them to come back. We want them to complete the transaction, whatever that transaction is, but we want them to come back and become a loyal user. It's just interesting.
That's your instinct, though, right? Humans are really instinctive, and if you put a 10-year-old in a room and say, like, I'm going to come in now and you need to sell me this cookie, right? They will do a bunch of stuff that is super instinctive. They will, if you say no, they'll try and entice you with another offer. They may plead, they may use body language. Online, a digital store, you have to build and intentionally think about all of those things. So, what was easy in person is now incredibly difficult to do online. Is part of the problem. It's part of why these big companies make so many small mistakes. It's just there's so many moving pieces now.
Yeah.
It's impossible. There is,
Mm.
I can criticize someone's work, but I couldn't build a perfect app.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And I guess it's really hard to replicate the emotion that you might get from going to a store, meeting someone that you like that seems genuinely interested in you. When you say, do you have these in a size 12, and they bring them out in a size 12, and they might say, we've also got these ones as well that they're slightly different, but they're black as well. But I really like this detailing on the side, if it's shoes, for example. And
Yeah.
and as a buyer in that store, you can really warm to that, whereas you don't get that human warmth and connection that you do online.
So this is the problem. I know we've gone off topic here, but this is the problem with VR and also why we're so far away from VR being lifelike, right? Is if you were in a shop with someone and you were like, "Can I have these in a size 9?" The shopkeeper will understand millions of different things that could happen, right? Like anything could happen, and that person will be able to make a pretty quick decision based on what to do next. If you drop a shoe, that will pick the shoe up. They won't think twice about that. The problem with VR is, all of those outcomes need to be considered. And so what happens when you get stuck behind, like people get stuck behind walls, right? Like, when you take that and try and build a 3D movable world, it's going to be so difficult. Like VR shopping is so far away from where we are now. But I see that all the time. People say, you'll just do VR shopping. It's like, the small things that you just don't consider.
Yeah.
It's going to take so long, decades.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting you say that. I mean, L'Oreal had the app where you could try on the virtual lipstick and all that stuff. And I think talking of VR, I think that one did well. How do you think that the thinking around design has really sort of evolved over the last few years? What sort of evolution of the thinking have you seen?
Yeah. Well, design is no longer, it used to be so I'm 27 now. When I started making websites when I was 13, 14, 10 years ago, design was different. Like websites were different. You'd build it for desktop firstly, and then you would accommodate to mobile, and it wouldn't work on some mobiles, and that was fine. You just use the desktop site. Whereas now there are just so many devices and so many integrations and so many platforms that, design is no longer, well, there's two things. One is there's so many devices and setups that you need to accommodate for. The second is people do continuous deployment now. Whereas it used to be you designed a website and you launched that website and then you may fiddle later. But now it's continuous. So when you think about, you may change the customer email experience one day and then, the homepage the next day and the product page the next day. And so you don't have enough time as a designer to fully map out an experience anymore. You have to be super comfortable with every piece moving the whole time. And what that means is, and companies like Airbnb kind of really created that movement, was really structured style sheets and methodology behind design. So every Airbnb page will follow a certain pattern, like a pattern library, and that means designers can quickly spin up new designs without worrying about how it interferes with the stuff. So that's definitely what's changed it's getting more and more popular. You see it all the time.
Nice. And what are the things that you still see on products or sites that make you go, why? Why did you do? Why did
Loads
you
of
buy
them.
that? Why? What's all that about?
Oh, so I work, client work wise. I work with household names that you'd think, right? Big companies, Google, people like that, and they make these same mistakes as everybody else. And it's stuff like password fields not showing the rules. They're not being an accurate progress bar. They're not being like a resend text link if you're trying to send a code out. Like, I've thought about it a lot. I should just list the 100 things and just be like, here is a list of 100 things. Make every designer just tick through it every single time, right? It's the same stuff.
Yeah, it should be the list of stuff you haven't done. Yeah, haven't done that, haven't done that, haven't done that.
It'd make my consultant job easier, wouldn't it? I could just send that over an email.
Yeah. Talk to me about your thoughts on plagiarism. So there's this thing that steal like an artist. Someone does something really well. You talk about Airbnb. If you had a site that was selling something, should you just copy the best things that they do and run with that until you find something better?
I talk about it in the Klarna case study. There are no points for originality, right? And by that, and someone challenged me on that, and they said, someone who worked at Apple said that the only way to do better is to be creative. Well, actually, if you're trying to make something that's 10 times better than the old phone, it has to look like a new phone. And so it has to work differently in every single way. Tesla, when they bring out a car, the interior has to not look like a car, right? And they did that for a bunch of reasons. One of them is it helps differentiate their product. Fine. Now, most people aren't doing something that's 10 times better. Monzo, Starling, Revolut, these challenger banks in the UK, they weren't 10 times better than the traditional banks. They were maybe 50% better. And if you're not going for something that's drastically new, being familiar is way more important. So it's no coincidence that every shopping site online seems to look the same. That every checkout looks the same, that every car website looks the same. Like, what you want is for when customers come to your website for the first time. If you were selling shoes, when a customer comes to your website for the first time, you want them to not even think about what they're doing and be like, this just looks like Nike, except it's not, right? And this is how I buy shoes. You don't want them to have to think, okay, so what is this? Try and orient themselves around how your menus work. Everybody has a menu at the top now, right? Yeah. There's probably no good reason why you couldn't have a menu down the side, on the left-hand side, but people often, no one really does. So should you copy other companies? Probably not, but everybody takes, creative inspiration, let's say. Stripe in the design community is famously copied by everybody, right? Stripe will do a new design. 6 months later, you'll see that design on every SaaS page on the internet.
Yeah.
And Stripe know that, and that's fine, right? And as long as you're not stealing, I don't know, images, but stealing the design or a layout,
So talking of images, then the interwebs is all starting to look the same because of Unsplash. Everyone using free Unsplash photography. There's now some really good sites. I was on Pablo, forget his surname now. Pablo's got a site where you can build your own, character SVGs and vector files, change the color of the patterns, these sort of cartoony icons of people. So I think some of that is starting to get quite samey as well. So this thing I have at the moment that really irks me, the internet's all just looking the same because everyone's using the same stock imagery, the same iconography. We go through these trends, don't we?
So interesting. I'm working on a project that I haven't discussed yet, and part of that is explaining exactly what you've just said, right? And why people shouldn't follow trends. And the reason the internet comes and goes in trends. And if you look back historically, this just happens every time. And if you imagine a curve, it goes up. You probably hear about the trend near the top. By the time you've got the resources to jump on that trend, you're on the way down, and then you're living that trend in the negative space. So people jumping on that kind of vector image stuff now, they're going to have that for 2 years when it's no longer cool. And this is why, when I see big organizations like big banks adopt this style, I'm like, you've got so much money, pay a designer to come up with anything, right? Don't just copy, because you're going to have that for ages and it just looks dated. You should never follow the trends that you see everybody else doing. Like a big one now is 3D. Well, not a big one. One that I predict will be big over the next 3 years will be 3D. It's like generated. I don't know how to describe it. There's a company I work with called Pitch.com. And they were the first people I ever saw do it. And it's like, almost looks like Play-Doh, right? It's like a 3D like render. And I see that every single day now, more and more. And that will be huge. And that will replace these vector images that you see all the time.
Yeah, cool. Mindful of your time, that's my bleeper as well. Apart from Built for Mars, where should all designers be going to learn, read, observe about what else is happening in the design world?
Yeah. Well, I would say probably the two big ones is a site called Dribble and a site called Behance.
Yep.
They're the two that I use. I mean, if ever I'm like, I need to design a splash page, I'll go on one of those two. Part of the reason I set up Built for Mars is I couldn't find anywhere for a UX designer to go.
Yeah.
I don't know anywhere else that you could go to get that sort of help. But Dribble and Behance have a lot of stuff, and that's where these designers are. So if you just follow the right people, I guess.
Yeah.
That works.
Mate, thank you so much. I'm mindful of your time. I think we've been 15, 20 minutes. I said we'd only take up a little bit of your time. I know you've got banks to go and redesign and all that sort of stuff. When we post this, I'll put links to your site underneath. Everyone should absolutely sign up for your newsletter as well. It's an absolute joy. And maybe we should talk about some of the other secret stuff you've got going on sometime as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Sweet.
And if you ever get over to Australia, come down to Melbourne, you know where we are. In 3 years, we're allowed to travel again.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we're finally allowed back out.
Brilliant, mate. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
No problem. See ya.
Thank you, buddy.